Amusement filled the room when Pearl Holly was bequeathed the dilapidated cooperage, a coastal Maine relic that had stood abandoned and unwanted for 20 years, to her older siblings, Spencer and Hartwell. The structure was nothing but a crumbling, timber-framed workshop decaying on the banks of the DeMarco River. Its cedar shingles had turned a ghostly silver from decades of ocean salt. The white oak drying shed was collapsing under its own weight, and the small loading dock had slowly dissolved into the muddy salt marsh. Spencer inherited the vast fortune, while Hartwell claimed the sprawling timberlands. Between them, they divided the historic Holly family homestead overlooking P.M. Quid Point, the lucrative Portland Vanguard portfolio, the picturesque New Agent summer cottage, and the 47 acres of coastal, white oak groves near Dormer Scott A. Mills. On that freezing February morning, her brothers walked out of the courthouse carrying a combined fortune of $11.25 million, leaving Pearl with nothing but the deed to the old cooperage. Yet just 12 days later, Pearl pried up a single wide plank of white oak right at the center of the workshop's main workbench and covering the stone-lined vault hidden beneath the floor. Before the month had even ended, the Smithsonian National Museum of American History and the Maine Maritime Museum at Bath jointly transferred a staggering $5,700,000 directly to her. For hidden within that underground chamber, wrapped in protective oilcloth at the bottom of a tin box bearing the inscription Cyrus, 1898, was a single sheet of cooperative paper, signed with a meticulous hand in 1933. That paper held a promise covenant that had endured for 92 years, and as the wire transfer cleared, Pearl finally understood why her father had bestowed upon her the only inheritance of true worth. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe and share in the comments where you are watching from. We love discovering how far these stories travel. Pearl Holly was only 28 years old on that bitter February morning when the family attorney read her father's final will. She sat at the far end of a long maple conference table in a small, wood-paneled law office on Main Street. In the biting chill of Dormer, Maine, Pearl sat quietly, draped in the only black dress she owned. Beneath her open, drab waxed cotton field jacket with its bright brass buttons, she wore a heavy navy blue wool fisherman's sweater to ward off the cold. Across the table sat her two older brothers. Spencer Holly 38, a Portland investment banker, had arrived the night before in his slate-gray BMW wagon. Beside him was 34-year-old Hartwell Holly a commercial real estate executive from Boston who had traveled north on the early Concord Trailways bus. Next to Spencer sat Camille Holly head-on, his wife of 8 years, her eyes glued to her phone from the moment she sat down. Since the funeral, a profound silence had stretched between Pearl and her brothers. Not a word had been exchanged. The attorney, Mr. Truman Brackett, was 71 years old, the very age Pearl's father, Elihu Halley, would have been. The two men had been roommates at Bowdoin College back in 1971. Mr. Brackett read the last will and testament with the slow, measured cadence of Lincoln County, a voice forged by reading 3,000 wills and learning long ago that the wishes of the dead speak best without decoration. On that hushed February morning, the room was completely still. Pearl watched her older brother's face intently as the lawyer's eyes moved down the page. The historic Holly family farm overlooking Pemaquid Point was left to Spencer. The Portland Vanguard portfolio, valued at $4.7 million in the February statement, went to Spencer. The summer cottage in New Agent was bequeathed to Hartwell. The 47-acre coastal, white oak grove rising above Dormer Scott Mills went to Hartwell. The cherished Stickley dining set, the family's Wedgwood silver, The BMW wagon, all of it went to Spencer item by item. Spencer's silver pen raced the printed inventory resting on his lap. Camille finally looked up from her screen, her thumb dancing quickly over a calculator on her device. Spencer leaned back, a brief, satisfied smile touching his lips. Then Mr. Brackett turned the page to read the final, small section. Inheritance. To my daughter, Pearl Beta Ricali Y, I bequeath the .88-acre parcel of land resting on the eastern banks of the Clara River, just below the town landing. This includes the historic 1898 Holly Y cooperage and all its adjoining structures, the white oak drying shed, the small loading dock, the hand-forged hoop corner, the cooper's workbench, the charring pit, and everything contained within. Mr. Brackett paused, lowering his reading glasses onto the open page. He folded his hands quietly over them. Spencer let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He actually left her the cooperage, he sneered. Father bequeathed her nothing but a rotting heap of cedar on the riverbank. Hartwell tapped his phone face down on the table. The authorities in Lincoln County condemned that structure for winters ago. He noted dryly. The Clara Historical Society offered $155,000, and as is, minus the demolition expenses. Once the land is cleared, she might walk away with $90,000 at best. Hacking the platinum watch on his wrist, Spencer offered a cold smile. Well, congratulations, Pearl. The cooperage is all yours. Mr. Brackett did not share in the amusement. Across the worn green leather of his writing pad, his eyes locked onto Pearl with a profound, lingering intensity. It was a look Spencer completely missed the gaze of a man who had waited 15 long years to see how this exact moment would unfold. Placing his spectacles back onto the testament, the attorney closed the document and read the witness clauses aloud. Pearl signed her acceptance, followed by the signatures of her brothers. In just 37 minutes, the proceedings were concluded. But what Spencer did not know, and what no one at that grand maple table except Mr. Truman Brackett understood, was that Pearl Holly had practically grown up inside that cooperage since she was 3 years old. Her grandmother, Lyra Holly Y, born Lyra Crosby, and known simply as Lyra her entire life, had carried her there every Saturday and through every warm summer afternoon of her youth. By hand, she had passed down the sacred heritage of the Maine coastal cooper's trade, teaching her the craft exactly the way it had been done for generations. It was at this very same wooden workbench that Lyra herself had once been initiated into the craft, guided by the hands of her father, Tobias Holly Y, and the fading strength of Cyrus Holly Y during his twilight years. Within the borders of Halling, this rustic workshop stood as the solitary sanctuary where Pearl truly felt a sense of belonging. Her brother Spencer, her senior by a decade, had departed for Phillips Academy and over when Pearl was just a 3-year-old child. He harbored a deep aversion to the scent of scorched timber and the metallic clang of the shaping hammer echoing from the forge, prompting him to abandon the workshop forever after the autumn of his 11th year. The workshop was the sacred realm of her grandmother. Yet when Lyra passed away during Pearl's 19th year, her father secured the doors with a heavy padlock, leaving the space untouched and shrouded in darkness. Tragedy had struck earlier when Pearl was 13. Her mother, Bequeathed Ricali Y, succumbed to ovarian cancer. Following a grueling 15-month struggle, the family home fell into a profound silence, save for the mechanical drone of medical apparatus operating in the rear parlor. Her father, Ali Muhali, who lived to the age of 71, was a reserved and meticulous soul shaped by the Lincoln County coastline. Throughout the 15 years spanning from his wife's passing to his own demise, he uttered scarcely 300 words annually to his daughter. The rare phrases he did share were strictly confined to discussions about the shoreline's white oak trees, or the maintenance of lobster traps. Lemuel was a man twice shattered by grief. First by the loss of bequeathed, and then 7 years later, by the passing of his mother Clara. This second bereavement fractured something fundamental within his spirit, a piece of himself that could never be restored. Thus Pearl's upbringing was suspended between the heavy quiet of her father and the gentle, unhurried afternoons spent alongside her grandmother. The contrast of the workshop split her youth into stark realities, the years she merely survived and the moments she truly felt alive. For 56 years, beginning in the year 1962, Clara Hawley had reigned as the master artisan of the family cooperage, perched gracefully along the banks of the Mercade River. Following the abrupt passing of her father, Tobias Clara assumed stewardship of the family trade, preserving its legacy until her own departure in 2018. The lineage of this historic cooperage traced its roots back for generations to Cyrus Daniel Hawley Y. Born in 1816 to a traditional Maine coastal family, Cyrus was heir to a heritage of fishermen, millers, and shipbuilders who had worked the waters of the Muscata River since 1791. After dedicating 7 years to an apprenticeship with the Bickford brothers in Wisconsin, a 29-year-old Cyrus walked the coastal roads back to Cadé in 1898. There he purchased a .8-acre plot on the river's eastern bank for $85 in cash. Over the course of that summer and autumn, he constructed his own timber-framed workshop. He raised hand-carved heart pine beams, hung weathered cedar shingles, and laid the slate roof piece by piece. At the center of this creative space, he placed a 30-foot workbench, which he had milled himself from a single white oak harvested in 1898 from the Hawley Y family grove near Deere's Cotta Mills. The very first vessel Cyrus crafted on this bench, in November of 1898, was a 45-gallon hand-ribbed white oak cask for a young Muscata River salt cod fisherman. From that moment, the Hawley cooperage supplied the maritime trade of Lincoln County without interruption, never missing a single season until October of 2018. By the age of 4, young Pearl could accurately weigh an iron hoop on the brass scales without a second glance. Clara taught her the nuances of the craft, showing her how to distinguish the standard utility barrels, the salt cod casks, herring kegs, and lobster bait containers that kept Lincoln County's fishing families afloat during the harsh winter months from the prestigious Heritage Cooper line. These were the hand-ribbed Heritage white oak whiskey casks that Clara produced annually for a select group of Maine craft distillers alongside the Heritage maple. These were the vessels that held the heritage of the land. Syrup casks destined for the historic families of western Maine, and traditional cider barrels crafted for the orchards along the coast. Under Clara's watchful eye, Pearl learned the sacred Hawley Y method, shaping white oak staves by hand and binding them with custom-forged iron hoops. The legacy had begun in 1898, when Cyrus first harvested timber from the coastal groves of Hawley Y. He split each stave by hand from quartered white oak logs, tracing the natural medullary rays to capture the wood's ultimate strength. By the time she was 6 years old, Pearl possessed the touch, cleanly splitting uncease, and white oak without ever tearing the grain. By the age of 8, she was entrusted with crafting the spring salt cod barrels for 47 fishing families along the Dormers River. "Patience, my little Pearl," Clara would whisper. "A barrel cannot be rushed. Your hands must move slowly against the white oak, one stave at a time. The forest is patient and you must be too." Then came a crisp Saturday morning in October of 2005. At just 9 years old, Pearl assembled her first complete salt cod barrel entirely on her own. She hand-ribbed and measured 38 staves, hammered 12 iron hoops into place, and finished both heads. From the shadows of the forge, Lyra watched in silence. No words were spoken, for none were needed. The quiet pride in Pearl's heart glowed for a month. But Lyra's lessons did not stop at success. She taught her the anatomy of failure as well. She warned her of the split grain stave, a mistake born of haste. It happened when a worker split the green oak at a slight angle to the medullary rather than directly along its path. On the workbench, the stave looked pristine, masking a fatal weakness buried deep within the heartwood. The flawed stave would bend into a barrel easily enough, but by the second seasonal run, the intense pressure of the brine would rupture the wood from the inside out, right at the widest curve of the bilge. The preserved cod would spoil, and the fishing family would remain unaware of their ruin until the barrel finally fractured. Under the amber glow of the cooperage lantern, Lyra raised a fractured piece of timber. "If you cleave against the natural flow of the wood, lie little Pearl," she warned. "The cask might survive its maiden voyage, but by the second journey, the sea will claim the catch. Do you understand the weight of what we lose?" The young girl, just 11 years old that autumn, nodded in quiet comprehension. From that dawn onward, she guided every single stave precisely along the medullary rays. Never again would a flawed, split-grain barrel leave her hands to board a vessel in the Demercado River fleet. Lyra trained her to decipher the secrets of the white oak using nothing but her fingertips. Milled in 1898 from a solitary, white oak in the coastal groves of Holly Y, the 30-foot cooperative workbench bore the history of 126 years of relentless hammer blows, polishing the wood at the primary workstation. A master of the craft, possessing this tactile sight, could feel through the grain which sections of the bench had witnessed 10,000 mornings of shaping barrels, and which areas had remained undisturbed for decades. Rest your hand upon the wood, little Pearl. Avoid the iron track. Feel the white oak grain itself. Where the surface feels as smooth as polished glass, you are touching the very spot where 10,000 barrels took shape. This wood holds the memory of every single one. By the age of 13 in the chilly dawn light, Pearl could place her palm on the 1898 workbench and, with closed eyes, identify which Holly White Cooper had occupied each station every Saturday for the past 40 years. By 15, she managed the entire cooperage independently 3 Saturdays out of every 4. The workbench, the assembly frame, the hoop hammer, the charring pit, the drying shed, the spring orders of salt cod barrels for the Demercado River fleet, and the annual specialty whiskey cask orders for the small Maine craft distilleries, all of it now rested in her hands. Yet to her, it was not yet a mere livelihood. For her, those golden Saturday mornings and sun-wrenched summer afternoons, spent beside her grandmother inside the timber frame cooperage on the eastern banks of the Rediscovering River, were simply the rhythm of existence. As they worked, Lyra's hands would deftly shape the wooden staves at the workbench, her voice weaving tales of the ancient craft. Memory was of Mr. Truman Bickford, a seasoned Rediscovering lobsterman who spent 43 years, from 1956 to 1999, commanding the lobster vessel Lyra Ann. He never once paid for his bait barrel repairs with a check. Instead, every Saturday morning, he offered freshly harvested lobsters and a single slice of Lyra's homemade molasses brown bread. Tears flowed freely onto the worn cooperative workbench on the morning of his retirement in 1999, when Lyra presented him with a small, hand-carved white oak keepsake casks, ending just 12 inches tall. Etched permanently into the wood of the bilge stave were his own name and the name of his beloved vessel. Yet, The narrative Lyra revisited most frequently was set in the desperate spring of 1933. For grueling years, the Great Depression had drained every ounce of currency from Lincoln County. By April of 1933, the market value of salt cod had collapsed from a prosperous $8.50 per quintal in 1929 to a mere $2.40. Consequently, the 47 fishing families along the D.O.R. Muscatee River found themselves unable to purchase the essential barrels for the upcoming spring run. Without these vessels, curing the catch was impossible, and without cured cod to sell, these families faced the devastating loss of their ancestral lands before the autumn leaves could fall. 64 years of age, a cooper named Cyrus Hawley refused to let hope die. On the evening of April 14, 1933, he sat at the cooperative workbench and penned a solemn pledge on a single sheet of paper. He wrapped this written promise securely in protective oilcloth, keeping his vow a secret from anyone outside the walls of the cooperage. For the next 14 days, he labored tirelessly from the first light of dawn until the stroke of midnight. Under the flickering glow of lanterns, he hand-rived white oak staves, drove heavy iron hoops, and meticulously dressed the barrel heads with his cooper's adze. When the sun rose on the morning of April 28, he had single and afshun crafted 47 salt cod barrels. He loaded the finished casks onto a horse-drawn wagon and spent 2 days traveling along the eastern banks of the Dormer-Cotta River. Under the cover of darkness, he placed a single and marked barrel on each of the 47 family docks before the sun rose. When dawn broke, the families discovered the mysterious offerings and used them to cure the spring cod that April. By the harvest of 1933, every fishing family along the Demarcus River had preserved enough catch to secure their land. The following month, on April 17, 1933, the DeMarco TDA Herald featured the story on its front page with the headline, "Mr. Cooper leaves salt cod barrels on 47 docks. No name, no charge." Cyrus kept this spring promise alive from 1933 until his passing in 1947. His son, Tobias, carried on the tradition from 1948 to 1962, and Lyra continued the legacy from 1962 until 2018. The cooperage honored this sacred vow for 980 springs. Pearl had grown up, sharing the legend of the 1933 barrels. But it was only much later that she understood the true weight of the promise, one sealed by a hand that still lay wrapped in oilcloth beneath the floorboards of the cooperative. Lyra's stories were always lessons in disguise. Pearl remembered being 12 years old and asking why her grandmother spent hours on riving white oak staves for 47 Demarcus River fishing families when an industrial manufacturer in Bath could ship machine laminated barrels overnight by truck for half the price. Lyra had set down the iron hook she was holding, turned to her, and said, "A laminated barrel is merely a transaction, little Pearl. A hand-rived white oak barrel is a living memory." When a Demarcus River fisherman cures his spring cod in a Holly Y hand-rived barrel in 2010, he is not just buying a container. He is buying the quiet patience of an old man who split 47 staves by lantern light in the spring of 1933. Because his great-grandfather was on the verge of losing his land. There are Demarcus River. For the households who still seek to know the craftsmen, whose hands shaped the wooden staves holding their curing cod every spring. These vessels are crafted. This is the sacred exchange. This wooden cask stands as a testament to the vow sworn on April 14, 1933. Though Pearl lacked the words to articulate it, she felt this truth deeply. To her, the barrel was a vessel of remembrance. If this narrative resonates with you, please consider subscribing to support our storytelling journey. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever cradled an object fashioned by an ancestor for a stranger, feeling the profound resonance of that unspoken legacy pass through your own hands? In the autumn of October 2018, Clara's journey came to a peaceful end. At 79 years old, she passed away in her sleep from a stroke, resting in her own bed within the modest caretaker's quarters, nestled at the rear of the cooperage. Pearl was only 19 at the time. Emu Holly while laid his mother to rest in the intimate Holly, White family plot at the Deruscade Congregational Church Cemetery. The following morning, with the heavy key to the workshop tucked safely in his pocket, he personally secured the timber-framed entrance with a padlock. For 7 long years, the workshop remained frozen in time, undisturbed. With every passing season, Pearl would drive by, her gaze drawn to the padlocked entrance and the cold, quiet forge visible through the salt-crusted glass of the front window. In those quiet moments, an unspoken vow began to take root in her heart. During the somber week of her father's passing, Spencer stood with her on the rear veranda of the Pequeathed Point homestead. He coldly delivered the news: the estate would go on the market by April, and she was expected to pack her life and depart by May 1st. Spencer never bothered to inquire about her destination, and Pearl offered him no clues. Clad in her waxed cotton field coat, she stood silently on the porch, hands buried deep in her pockets, watching her brother's slate-gray BMW wagon retreat down the long, pebbled driveway toward Pequeathed Point Road. It was the Wednesday following the reading of the Testament. With the echoes of the reading still lingering, Pearl guided her 1991 Chevrolet Cave 1500 pickup toward the banks of the Deruscade, a Rivera vehicle that represented the singular triumph of her own hard-earned savings. Purchased for $1,950 in cash from a retired Wisconsin sea lammer near Newcastle, the truck now came to a rest on the gravel turnaround directly before the silent cooperage. 7 long years had drifted by since she last stepped inside. In all that time she had only ever stood before the padlocked timber door, staring at the heavy iron clasp and recalling the miniature brass key her grandmother had once hung from a leather strap above the lintel, keepsake Lemuel had retrieved on the morning they laid Lyra to rest. Key had remained out of reach until Mr. Truman Brackett handed it to her in a small envelope, secured with a dollop of red wax. After the reading of the will, she had tucked the precious parcel deep into the inner pocket of her field jacket before driving home along the winding coastal road that afternoon. She had kept the seal intact until that very morning, breaking it by the kitchen window in the quiet, pale dawn of February, before the wood stove had even stirred to life. Now, walking across the cold, crunching gravel in the early light, she stood before the padlocked timbered, and took a deep, centering breath. She guided the small brass key into the heavy iron padlock and turned it. The mechanism yielded. Lifting the heavy lock from the hasp, she set it gently upon the weathered cedar threshold. Placing her palm flat against the timber door, she nudged it open, the ancient iron hinges groaning with a slow, scraping sigh against the cedar frame. The sanctuary of the cooperage remained perfectly preserved. Stretching along the southern wall was the 30-foot white oak workbench dating back to 1898, while the cooper's adze and the small brass branding stamp hung precisely where Lyra had placed them in October of 2018. Near the entrance, the hoop forge occupied its familiar corner, the anvil still nestled securely within the bricked hearth. On the cedar-pegged wall, the rack of hand-forged iron hoops remained suspended, arranged meticulously by size, waiting for a hand that had long since departed. Suspended above its iron base at the heart of the room, the stave-shaping frame commanded the space. Along the northern wall, a 30-foot expanse of cedar shelving stood tall, still bearing the handwritten labels penned by Lyra's own hand. At the rear, the heavy workshop door opened out toward the white oak's easing shed, and the quiet loading dock. Stretching from end to end, the wide white oak floorboards glowed with a warm golden patina, polished to perfection by a century and a quarter of craftsmen's boots. At the very center where the workbench once stood, the wood bore the gentle, shallow contours of time. At the entrance, the air was thick with the scent of toasted oak. The faint, salty memory of cod brine etched into the ancient beams, and the crisp, cold breath of the deer-ace caudae rising through the floorboards. Earl stepped inside, pausing at the threshold of the wide oak floor to take a long, deep breath. Having left her boots and socks on the weathered cedar outside, she began to walk barefoot across the workshop. The cool timber sent a chill up through her soles, awakening a visceral memory of the floor's shifting warmth and the hollows carved by those who came before. She could feel the subtle grooves where Lyra had labored for 56 years, the deeper indentations left by Tobias during his 30 years of service, and the most profound depression of all at the center, where Cyrus himself had stood from 1898 until 1947. The white oak held the memory of them all. Suddenly, a moment from her childhood returned. She was 10 years old in the autumn chill, kneeling at that very center point, pressing her palm against a single plank distinguished by its dark, rich grain. "Your great-grandfather, Cyrus, was a meticulous man, little Pearl," Lyra had told her. "When he laid these floorboards in 1898, he crafted a secret hatch right beneath the workbench, directly under the spot where he stood every single day. For nearly half a century, 49 years of dedication at the rising frame, he poured his life into his craft. On his very last evening in 1947, he finally shared the secret with me, whispering that this was the sacred place where the Cooper secured what could never be allowed to fade away. Yet, I never once lifted that board." Now, she knelt at the absolute center of the cooperative workshop. The white oak plank rested perfectly flush with the surrounding floor, nearly invisible against the polished, aged wood. In one corner lay a small iron ring, a modest fixture her bare feet had crossed 1,000 times without ever realizing its purpose. Slipping her index finger through the cold metal loop, she pulled upward. The heavy, 3-inch thick slab of dense, tight-grained white oak from the Holly-White coastal grove slowly yielded. Beneath it lay a stone-lined vault, 3 feet deep and 20 inches wide, built directly into the original 1898 Triverstone foundation of the cooperative bridge. Resting at the very bottom in the far corner was a brick-sized tin box, its lid bearing the stamped inscription of Cyrus, 1898. Underneath, this tin container, occupying the rest of the chamber, was a 3-foot by 16-inch wooden hatch set within a heart pine frame. Its seams hermetically sealed with deep blue wax, carrying the distinct imprint of the Holly-White schooner. Using both hands, she lifted the tin box out first, placing it gently onto the weathered white oak floor of the workshop in the pale, quiet light of February. She opened the lid. Inside, a heavy bundle wrapped in oilcloth unfurled across her palms, revealing 265 gold coins stacked in flawless rows. There were Liberty half-eagles, quarter-eagles, and a rare handful of street gods, double eagles, all in breathtaking condition. A coined eeler in Portland would later calculate the weight of the collection at 31,800. Beneath the bundle lay a small, leather-bound journal containing Cyrus's original 1898 cooperative curriculum, detailing the precise splitting angle for every white oak stave, the specific number for every iron hoop, and the exact layout for every barrel pattern, written in the precise, disciplined penmanship of a Bickford brothers apprentice were the exact calculations of barrel volumes and the gentle sweep of their wooden staves. Beside these notes lay the leather-bound journal of the trade liar's personal chronicle of labor. Across 330 pages of dense, orderly handwriting, she had documented her weekly stewardship of the workshop every single Saturday morning, spanning the decades from 1960 to until 2018. Tucked under the journal was a faded, sepia-tone photograph dating back to 1898. It captured Cyrus Hawley standing proudly before the newly constructed workshop clutching his cooper's adze. Right beside him at the wooden workbench stood a 7-year-old child, Tobias, against the backdrop of coastal Maine and Jersey. Resting under the picture was a single folded, aging newspaper clipping, published in the D. Amarcata Herald on April 17, 1933. The bold headline declared, "Anonymous Cooper delivers salt cod to 47 wars free of charge." Pasting atop this archive of history was a folded envelope, secured with a dollop of dark blue wax, bearing Pearl's name. Posing her thumbnail, Pearl cracked the seal. She eased herself down onto the chilly white oak floorboards, right in the heart of the workshop beside the central workbench. Bathed in the soft, wintry February light filtering through the salt-glazed window pane, she began to read. October 4th, 2018. My dearest Pearl, when these words finally reach you, I will have passed on, and the silence in the workshop will have lingered long enough for your father to realize it was time to pass this key to you. Back in 1898, my grandfather Cyrus hid these savings under the floorboards, refusing to entrust his hard-earned cooperage earnings to any bank in Lincoln County. He shared this secret with me on his deathbed in 1947, extracting the solemn vow that I would never disturb the wood. I have honored that oath until now. This trade sustained our family throughout my entire existence, and the better part of yours, while your brothers will undoubtedly liquidate whatever assets they can find. They can never touch this chest, for they remain entirely unaware of its existence. The instructional guides belong to Cyrus, and the ledger stands as our history. If the calling speaks to you, my dear Pearl, pick up the tools once more. The workshop is now yours. The document bore the name, Lyra Crosby Holly Y. Master Cooper, dated October 2018. Pearl carefully tucked the page away, slipping it into the inner pocket of her woolen sweater, keeping her tears at bay. Stepping toward the heart of the cooperative workshop, she approached the exact station where Lyra had spent 56 years assembling barrels. She rested her open hand upon the smooth, darkened grain of the white oak workbench. Beneath her fingers, she could almost feel the residual warmth of 6 decades of labor, tracing the subtle indentation worn into the wood where her grandmother had stood day after day. The crisp winter air carried the familiar scent of toasted timber and metal polish up from the floorboards. Though the timber felt cold to the touch, the hollow in the wood fit her hand flawlessly. Looking out at the dim February dawn breaking over the Derry-Scate River, she whispered into the silence, "Thank you, grandmother. I will carry on the trade." Once more, she unfolded the old news clipping. The report detailed a mysterious event from the night of April 15, 1933. When 47 hand-split white oak barrels meant for salt cod materialized on 47 different piers along the DeMarco TDA River. Shock received a single barrel under the cover of darkness, left completely anonymously before the sun rose. The article recorded the names of every household spared. The Bickford deaths at Newcastle, the Withames at DeMarco TDA Mills, the Bracketts at DeMarco TDA Landing, the Crosby-S at South Bristol, the Lou Rings at Round Pond, and the Drinkwaters at New Harbor. Concluding the piece, the editor of the Doris, Ed A. Harrell, wrote a poignant tribute. The anonymous soul who placed those 47 handcrafted barrels on those docks during the most devastating spring the local fisheries had ever endured, expecting nothing in return, rescued an entire generation of Amarcata River fishermen from losing their ancestral lands. Pearl scanned the words twice more before gently folding the paper. She placed it securely in her sweater's inner pocket, right next to the letter. Turning her attention back to the hollow space, her eyes fell upon the wax-sealed hatch beneath the floorboards where the metal container had been hidden. Resting within its wooden borders, she gently extracted the heavy panel and set it down upon the pale oak planks at her feet. Peering back into the newly revealed opening, she realized the truth. This was no mere shallow compartment, but a secret hatchway leading to something far deeper. Descending into the shadows was a steep, slender staircase carved from rock. Gentle draft drifted upward, carrying a crisp, nostalgic aroma, a blend of ancient parchment, weathered timber, and the sharp tang of ocean brine. Her eyes traced the perimeter of the hatch, where 8 delicate wax seals remained intact. Though aged and fragile, the deep blue wax still proudly bore the stamped emblem of the Hollyweiss Cooner, and touched by time. Reaching for the kerosene lamp hanging from the cedar paneling, she struck a flame to the wick, casting a warm, flickering glow. With one hand brushing against the chilled, smooth riverstone wall for balance, she began her descent into the earth. 14 steps down, the passage opened into a subterranean sanctuary, a modest chamber measuring 12 by 22 feet, enclosed by low riverstone ceilings. A pale frost of coastal mildew dusted the masonry, a testament to decades of damp ocean air, while beneath her boots lay a floor of weathered Maine granite. Lining the perimeter of the room, sturdy pine shelving anchored directly into the stone held the legendary Holly Waikouapi Heritage Archive. Resting on the higher tiers were 380 bundles of white oak staves, each marked with a cedar label stenciled back in 1898. These tags identified them as Holly Coastal Grove, White Oak 1898 quarter section and Northeast Ridge. Within each of these preserved packages, protected by oil's licked cloth, were 48 hand-split staves, meticulously tended to and restored by Lyra every 7 years. Occupying the bottom shelves were 47 original, leather-bound ledgers detailing the Holly Cooperage operations. The spines of these volumes featured elegant, gold-embossed lettering in the classic Dormer Scott A. School hand, preserving the comprehensive history of the cooperage from 1898 until 2018. Beside the scheduled spring shipments, a tiny red anchor had been carefully drawn in the margins. This sacred vault of history had remained undisturbed for 78 years. In the very center of the cellar, resting upon a table of solid heart pine, sat a solitary package wrapped in oilcloth. Gently, she peeled back the protective layers. Resting inside were 3. Among the treasures lay the comprehensive 1898 Guide to the Holly Cooperage Craft, a 56-page masterpiece meticulously illustrated by Cyrus himself. This manual had been pressed onto fine cotton rag paper in the town of Deer is Cat A. With painstaking detail, Cyrus had sketched every single page, capturing the precise angles for splitting wood, the art of shaping hoops, the delicate process of dressing the barrel heads, the marking of the stamps, and the sacred warmth of the traditional street. On's charring fire. Alongside this lay a dozen sheets of heavy cot and rafting paper, featuring Cyrus's own 1898 cartography of the Demerara River, which carefully charted the 187 ox belonging to the fishing families of Lincoln County. Tucked safely beneath this map was a separate, small pouch of oiled cloth, protecting a twice-folded sheet of parchment. With gentle reverence, Pearl retrieved the packet. She pressed her thumbnail against the fragile blue wax seal, feeling it snap, and slowly smoothed out the document. The parchment was delicate and amber-red with age, its margins fraying, bearing words written in a soft, faded sepia ink. And every character spoke of a writer who had shaped each stroke with deliberate, heartfelt precision. Her eyes traced the script. I, Cyrus Daniel Hawley Y, Master Cooper and proprietor of the Hawley Y Cooperage in Deros Cade, Maine, on this 14th day of April, 1933, do solemnly and freely pledge to the 47 fishing households along the Demarcus River. So long as the fishing vessels sail and my hands possess the strength to timber, I shall provide every family, each spring, with all the salt cod barrels they need for their seasonal catch. This shall be done, entirely free of cost, requiring no payment or favor in return. This covenant remains binding upon myself, my descendants, and every Cooper who shall ever lead the Hawley Kap Ridge hereafter. Below this stood the signature of Cyrus D. Halls Y. Beneath his name, 3 distinct scripts written across the passing decades reaffirmed the sacred vow with the words, I carry this promise forward. It was signed by Tobias C. Holy on April 14, 1948, then by Lyra C. Holy on April 14, 1962, and finally by Ellie Th. Halley on April 14, 1985. A lineage of 4 generations had bound themselves to this single, enduring oath. For a long, quiet moment, Pearl held the fragile document close, bathed in the warm, flickering glow of the kerosene lantern. Then with quiet reverence, she slipped the document back into its protective oilcloth sleeve, setting it gently upon the heart pine table alongside the instructional manual and the farm map. She ascended the stone staircase and carefully fitted the trapdoor back into its heart pine frame. Sitting on the white oak floor at the exact center of the cooperage workbench, she remained motionless for a long time, lost in thought. At dawn the next morning, she drove the K500 along the coastal highway toward the P.M. Quid Point farmhouse. She unlocked the heavy oak front door using the brass key her father had given her the previous October. Inside, the farmhouse was cold and still. She walked through the front parlor to the small study at the back of the house, where her father had kept his desk for 45 years. The desk, a sturdy white pine roll-top, had been hand-boiled by her great-grandfather Tobias Hawley Y in 1948. She slid the wooden roll-top upward. Resting deliberately on the worn green leather writing pad was a single sealed envelope, her name written across the front in her father's slow, deliberate handwriting. She lifted the envelope. Flap was secured with the same deep blue wax that had sealed Lyra's letter, and the cellar trapdoor, Lemuel had clearly used the very same wax stick. Pearl broke the seal, with her thumbnail, and read, Pearl, if you are reading these words, you have uncovered the cooperage, and in finding the cooperage, you have discovered the floor cavity. In finding the cavity, you have revealed the cellar trapdoor, and in finding the trapdoor, you have inherited the promise. For 40 years, the Smithsonian, the Maine Maritime Museum at Bath, and the Penobscot Marine Museum at Sursport have searched for the Holly Y Heritage Cooper archive. They will offer to buy the stave bundles, the ledgers, the methodology manual, and the farm map, but the promise is far more sacred. Add your hand to our legacy, down to the legacy of your grandfather Tobias, your grandmother Lyra, and myself. Ensure the springtime offerings reach the descendants of those 47 families for as long as the cod boats continue to brave the waves. Every winter, spanning 47 years, your grandmother and I quietly sold a single gold coin through a contact in Portland, keeping our identities hidden. With those resources, we secretly funded 47 complete scholarships at Bodoang College from 1970 to until 2018, awarding one annually to honor each of the 47's Caude River fishing households that Cyrus rescued during the spring of 1933. Your brothers remained unaware of this, though your mother was in on the secret. I chose to bequeath the cooperage to you, as it represents the only piece of this inheritance your grandmother truly wished for you to possess. You should reach out to Drive Hazel Crosby, the Smithsonian curator, who is your grandmother's cousin's daughter. She anticipates your call. Expressing my feelings has never come easily to me, and I deeply regret not speaking more openly with you. I hand down to you the treasures that once belonged to your grandmother. With love, Ellie Muhali, your father. September 28, 2024. As the pale light of a late February afternoon filtered through the window, Pearl remained motionless at her father's white pine roll-top desk. Gently she folded the parchment and slipped it into the interior pocket of her woolen sweater, placing it next to the initial letter and the newspaper clipping. She slid the desk cover shut. Navigating the winding coastal highway, she returned to the cooperage, locking the heavy timber-framed door to shut out the world. When Monday morning arrived, she placed the tin box on the passenger seat of her K-100 and made her way to Main Street, pulling up outside the Deer Cotta Tidewater Savings. The branch manager of 32 years, Mrs. Mara Gold Crosby, who was Lyra's first cousin, placed the coins onto the bank's antique brass scales. After a quick phone call to a dealer in Portland, she verified their worth at $31,800. Pearl chose to deposit $30,900 into her account, stepping back out to the K-500 with $900 tucked safely inside the pocket of her wool sweater. Mrs. Upon witnessing the dealer's final valuation, Crosby uttered not a single word. Instead, she shared a silent, profound gaze with Pearl across the polished brass scale before putting pen to paper, finalizing the receipt. That very afternoon, she reached out to Drive Hazel Crosby at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. 3 days later, Drive B made the journey up from Washington, arriving in a specialized, climate-controlled archival vehicle. Joining her was Drive Jill EMUWTHM, the Senior Heritage Cooperative Curator from the Maine Maritime Museum, who traveled up the coastline from Bath, while the Penobscot Marine Muse, Ian's Senior Cooperative Archivist, journeyed south from Sursport, alongside 3 expert conservators from the Smithsonian. This dedicated team labored for 15 hours in the dim cellar. They meticulously cataloged 380 bundles of white oak staves, 47 leather-bound cooperage ledgers, Cyrus's 56-page guide to his craft, and a 12-sheet agricultural map of the farm. Wearing protective, archival gloves, Drive Crosby devoted to additional hours to the 1933 promise at the Heart Pine table. She studied every word with reverence, eventually flipping the document to inspect the 4 historic signatures left by successive generations. Under the warm, flickering glow of the kerosene lantern, She remained motionless in quiet contemplation before finally breaking the silence. On behalf of the Smithsonian, the Maine Maritime Museum, and the Penobscot Marine Museum, she presented a joint offer of $5,700,000 to acquire the entire Cooperage archives. The proposal included a provision for the 1933 promise to be exhibited on a rotating perpetual loan across all three prestigious institutions. Under the agreement, Pearl would keep Cyrus's original 1898 educational notebook, along with a single master bundle of each stave variety from the cellar, ensuring the Heritage Cooperative could continue its vital work. Standing by the old workbench, Pearl shook Drive Crosby's hand, sealing the historic pact. Exactly 12 days after the reading of the will, the funds were successfully wired. This crucial transaction would finance every dream and endeavor that lay ahead. The next Thursday, she contacted the Heritage Agriculture program at Bowdoin College, prompting Drive and Marcellus Brackett to make the drive down from. The following Saturday, the journey to Brunswick commenced, accompanied by a dedicated team of 5 graduate students. Inside the historic cooperage, they spent 10 hours meticulously documenting the 12 detailed sheets of Cyrus's farm map and the 56 pages of his instructional manual. Following this archival work, they set out with Pearl, traveling to every single one of the 187 fishing family docks mapped along the winding Dormer Scotty River. Remarkably, 112 of these historic, generational docks were still active, serving as living testaments to the river's enduring legacy. These precious records, the Holly Y Methodology Guide, and the hand-drawn farm map became the foundational pillars for Bowdoin's newly expanded Holly Y Heritage Cooperage Preservation Initiative. A monumental 10-year, $1.02 million research grant from BODINE secured the vital funding needed to sustain the cooperage through its very first winter of operations. The opening month was defined by the arduous, loving task of restoring the workshop to its former glory. Having endured 7 years of relentless Maine coastal weather, the slate roof was battered and missing third eye for tiles. The massive 30-foot white oak workbench stood in desperate need of a gentle, restorative coating of beeswax polish. While nearby, the hearth of the hoop forge required a brand new lining of fire bricks to withstand the heat once more. To mend the roof, Pearl sorts 200 fresh slate tiles from a quarry situated just north of Bath, investing $940 in the materials. She sought the wisdom of Mr. Truman Bickford, an 81-year-old retired lobsterman from Arcata, who arrived at the cooperage one Wednesday. With patient hands, he guided her in rebuilding the forge corner, ensuring the preservation of its original 1898 architectural geometry. With her own hands, she painstakingly applied 3 protective layers of beeswax polish to the long white oak workbench, bringing its rich grain back to life. As the weekend arrived, she kindled the cooperage's wood stove with dry, fragrant white birch, and split her very first hand-rived white oak stave. It was destined for a small, 45-gallon salt cod barrel, crafted especially for the Bickford family's upcoming spring harvest. The wood split beautifully and true. Slowly, as the cold months of that first winter wore on, she transformed the caretaker's quarters at the rear of the cooperage into her own sanctuary. Piece by piece, she quietly retrieved the folding bed from the farmhouse's rear bedroom, rescuing it just before her brother's real estate agent arrived to photograph the property. And from a rustic barn sale just outside Wisconsin, she discovered a modest kitchen table to complete her new home. Acquiring essentials for a mere $26, she also discovered a warm woolen quilt for $16 at a second-hand store nestled along Arcata's Main Street. The following Sunday, Mr. Truman Bickford arrived bearing a compact, cast-iron parlor stove retrieved from his personal salt house. He personally set it up in the corner of her new home, routing the exhaust pipe directly through the cedar siding, stubbornly refusing any form of monetary compensation. It was right at this workbench, back in 1916, that your grandmother hand-split the wooden staves for my father's fish barrels. He reminisced, asking for nothing more than a hot cup of coffee in return. During her inaugural night, she remained awake on a cot positioned near the south-facing window, listening to the gentle, rhythmic clicking of the cooling metal joints of the hearth. Across the icy expanse of the tidal river, the tolling bells of the Dear Iscata Congregational Church announced the 11th hour. Beneath this ceiling, she realized with profound clarity that she was finally home. At 28 years old, a sense of belonging finally settled over her life. Deep blue fisherman's sweater hung neatly from a wooden peg near the dining area, while Cyrus's vacant tin container found its home on the heart pine shelf resting over the entryway. Resting on the table, a fresh business ledger awaited Pearl as she began documenting her very first professional orders. On April 14, 2025, she penned her first entry, a solemn vow of her craftsmanship. She recorded 47 hands, flip white oak barrels destined for the local Dear Iscata shipping vessels, honoring the lineage of promises, spanning 980 seasons. Each Saturday morning brought the familiar rumble of Mr. Truman Bickford's Santaned, 1968 Mercedes 220D, a vehicle he had lovingly maintained for 54 years. As he traveled down from his Newcastle salt house, he always arrived carrying a warm thermos and a bag filled with fresh cornbread baked by his wife. After sharing a quiet cup of coffee at her table, he would journey back along the scenic coastal highway. By her second year of operation, the Maine Maritime Museum transformed the historical Holly Coo Ridge archives into an active, collaborative alliance with her workshop. The institution sought an authentic, traditional workshop to craft hand-split wooden casks, preserving the legacy of the New England coastal heritage cooper. This was a testament to the community. 47 annual Heritage Barrel Station gatherings, honoring each of the 47 fishing households along the Iscata River, whom Cyrus had rescued during the spring of 1933. All standing by the worn workbench, they finalized the agreement. 47 Heritage Cooperative Station gatherings annually, priced at $2,400 per occasion, spanning a decade. Pearl sealed the pact with a handshake from Drive. With them, when the initial funds from the Maine Maritime Museum arrived that May, Pearl secured the financing needed for her second winter season at the cooperage. Meanwhile, the weekend crowds continued to swell. In May of that inaugural year, a descendant of the Newcastle Bickford Smurfs, Bickford's great-granddaughter, made the journey down from Augusta. She brought with her a modest jar of her grandmother's homemade bread and butter pickles, along with a cherished memory she had held close since childhood. Pearl welcomed her into the apartment, brewing a fresh pot of coffee as they sat at the kitchen table, ready to listen. The woman shared how her great-grandfather was among those 47 Iscata River fishermen who, at the break of dawn on April 15, 1933, discovered a hand-split alt cod barrel waiting on his dock. Later in life, he also became one of the 47 Bodini College students, supported by the quiet generosity of Lyra and L. Emuel's 1973 endowment. By November, she had returned, bringing her to grandchildren to experience the entire run of winter Saturday gatherings. On a Saturday in June, Mr. Truman Brackett arrived, carrying the authentic, hand-painted Holly white copper sign from 1898. He had purchased the relic at Cyrus Holly Wise Estate auction back in 1947, preserving it in the corridor of his law practice for 77 years. He gently placed the piece of history onto the workbench, declining even a warm cup of coffee before departing. Following a spotlight feature on the spring promise in coastal New England Heritage magazine, travelers began journeying up the coast road from all corners of northern New England. Even after Pearl increased the price of each barrel by $2, her schedule remained completely filled 20 Saturdays in advance. As her second autumn arrived, she fell into the peaceful routine of resting on the heavy timber steps of the cooperage during the quiet final hour of the day. As the morning light broke, she cradled a warm mug of coffee in both hands. Beside the property, the DeMarco Tete River drifted in peaceful silence. Round the bend of the river, the maples had flared into the rich scarlet of mid-October, while on the opposite shore, the salt marshes glowed like smoky gold. Her mind turned to Clara, and to Cyrus, a man she had never known, yet whose fingers had once split the very same white oak that now rested beneath her open palm. She thought of her father Lemuel, whose fateful decision in September of 2024 had granted her the sole inheritance she had ever wished to possess. She remembered the 47 fishing families along the Rediscovering River, who before sunrise on April 15, 1933, discovered 47 hand-made barrels left upon their docks. She recalled the 47 Bodo scholars whose educations Clara had anonymously funded, and the long continuous line of coopers whose hands had labored at the workbench before the craft was finally passed down to her. This is the true nature of the heritage our grandmothers instruct us to preserve. As for year-old children, balancing an iron hoop on a brass scale beside our grandmother's weathered hand, we do not realize that the act of measurement is the craft itself. We acquire the knowledge gradually, hoop by hoop. Then, 7 years after the matriarch passes away, we pry up a floorboard she always left untouched, and covering the legacy she left behind. In that moment, the lesson she was imparting becomes clear. She was showing us that a hand-split barrel for salt cod is a vessel of memory, preserved by the oak until the time of harvest. She was teaching us that the craft is defined by patience. It is the hand that acquires the skill, the hand that passes it on, and the hand that inherits it next. And occasionally, the craft is the silent grace that funds 47 Bodo and scholarships across 47 Rediscovering autumns, never revealing the identity of the benefactor. Where brothers walked away with the millions, they inherited the Anquid Point Farm, the Portland real estate portfolio, the New Agent Cottage, and the coastal White Oak Grove. They received They measured the world solely by what wealth could buy, scoffing at the weathered workshop on the river's edge as they departed. But they failed to comprehend the legacy of the craft. They failed to see the grandmother's enduring spirit. They could not foresee the dawn of April 15, 1933, when 47 docks along the Rediscovering River awoke to find a freshly crafted barrel resting on their planks. They missed the sacred vow, and they missed the guiding hand that reached out in the aftermath. Zoe Holly was only 28 years old, standing in the heavy shadow of her father's passing. With only a single dollar left to her name, she risked it all on a neglected cooperage sitting on a mere fraction of an acre along the eastern banks of the Rediscovering River in Lincoln County, Maine. It was, without question, the most magnificent dollar she would ever part with. This journey touched your soul. Please share it with someone who needs inspiration today. Tell us in the comments below. Has anyone in your lineage ever quietly carried a secret grace like this, a beautiful act of kindness, known only to them? We would be honored to read your family stories. Until we meet again on the next quiet road.